Schönen guten Abend, herzlich willkommen. Okay. Mr. Hattie isn't leaving, I hope. Er kommt gleich wieder, er hat hinten was liegen gelassen, ist sofort wieder da. Ich habe die letzte Frage mitbekommen vom Panel, das vor uns hier im Saal stattgefunden hat. Und die Frage war, how would you express your state of mind in an emoji right now? Und es gab einige Kuss-Emojis und so. Ich muss sagen, nach den Panels und Workshops, die ich heute besucht habe, wäre es bei mir eher dieses Emoji, dem die Schädelplatte hochfliegt und wo das Hirn raustritt wegen Overload. Mr. Hattie, what is your state of mind right now expressed in an emoji?
Emoji?
Yeah. I know you were coming from the southwest, okay.
A little nervous.
A little nervous, okay. I know you're coming from the southwest of Germany.
With beautiful and raining, lovely.
Okay, and now to the northeast, so
Yes.
You're fit for your keynote?
Too late now.
Okay. So, ihr wisst natürlich alle, mit wem ich hier spreche, und ich bin mir sicher, dass sich viele sehr freuen auf die Keynote von Ihnen heute Abend. Dank der Themenpatenschaft der Schwarz Stiftung konnten wir den Bildungsforscher John Hattie holen und hier auf die Bühne der Konferenz Bildung, Digitalisierung stellen. Das freut uns wahnsinnig. Sie haben eine enorme Fanbase in Deutschland. You've got a huge fanbase in Germany, and I guess it's not without a reason that especially in Germany your literature is so popular. Es gibt viele Menschen, die sich für Bildung, für Schule interessieren, die schwören auf seine Studie und seine Lernerfolgsmessparameter, Visible Learning, also die Auswertung, die Ableitung aus mehreren hundert Lernstandserhebungen, aus Metastudien, aus denen er dann wiederum Rückschlüsse zieht auf die Faktoren, die gutes und gelingendes Lernen ausmachen. Ich denke, wir hören dazu gleich noch ein bisschen mehr von Ihnen. Und da Sie jetzt so andächtig schweigen, würde ich doch noch mal um einen großen begrüßenden Applaus bitten. John Hattie ist Professor für Erziehungswissenschaften, Direktor des Education Research Institutes an der University of Melbourne. Und wer sich jetzt hier im Saal als ausgesprochener Liebhaber oder Liebhaberin insbesondere des deutschen Schulsystems versteht, hat jetzt hier vielleicht eine eher harte Dreiviertelstunde vor sich. I would like to give a quote of yours, Mr. Hattie. Deutschland hat das ungerechteste Schulsystem, das ich kenne, ist so eine Aussage, die man sich einmeißeln kann. Das haben Sie zu Protokoll gegeben. Es sei nicht nur ungerecht, sondern zudem von begrenztem Nutzen, also schlecht in zweierlei Hinsicht. Bevor wir aber ins Eingemachte gehen mit Mr. Hattie, ein praktischer Hinweis. Er wird auf Englisch sprechen. Die KI-Übersetzung läuft dann über den Bildschirm. Wer möchte, ich weiß, wir haben, ich glaube, so 200 Kopfhörer, in die live reingedolmetscht wird. Sie sind dran vorbeigekommen, als Sie den Saal betreten haben. Sollte jemandem auffallen, oh, so ein Ding hätte ich jetzt gerne, müsste die Person sich nochmal aus der Reihe hinaus bewegen und einen solchen Kopfhörer holen. Und dann hören Sie die Stimme der beiden Damen dort hinten, schwach beleuchtet im Glaskasten. Isabel Rauschmeier und Michelle Toussaint werden übersetzen in ihre Ohren hinein. Ja, genau. Sie haben das heute sicherlich schon ausgekostet. Es gibt einen Thementrack auf der Konferenz, der heißt personalisiertes Lernen. John Hattie wird das jetzt in Bezug setzen zu seiner Forschung, also zum sichtbaren Lernen. Und der Vortragstitel hat sich in letzter Sekunde nochmal geändert. Ich weiß nicht, ob das schon im Programm hinterlegt werden konnte oder ob der Druckschluss da früher war. Visible Learning in the Context of Personalized Learning. Das werden wir jetzt von Ihnen hören. Wir erfahren, you look surprised, isn't it the right title I've given?
I'll comment on that in a moment, but it's kind of right, but I assume everything you're saying is correct.
Okay.
My German is perfect.
Okay, it's kind of right. Die Abweichung werden Sie gleich überprüfen können. Wir erfahren jetzt, welchen Nutzen Konzepte der Personalisierung haben, vielleicht auch, welche Fragestellungen sich daraus ergeben, welche Schwachstellen es gibt. Und ich hoffe auch, wir erfahren, welchen Beitrag personalisiertes Lernen leisten kann, wenn es darum geht, Schülerinnen und Schüler zu digitaler Souveränität zu verhelfen. Das ist unser Thema. The stage is yours.
Thank you, Katja.
Gerne.
I'm assuming everything Katja said was correct. And thank you for listening to me in English. My English is a bit better than my German, a lot better than my German. But I've now been here for 2 weeks, from Kiel to Hebron, to Frankfurt, to Stuttgart, and here in Berlin. And it's kind of exciting coming back to this part of the world. You can feel quite a big sense of momentum is starting to happen here in Germany. And one of the things that I want to talk about tonight with this title that I was given, as you'll see, it's not going to be one of my favourite topics, but it's a wonderful topic to talk about, to work from what doesn't work so well to what really works well. We all know that personalised learning, individualised learning has been around a long time. But where does it fit in terms of its overall effectiveness on achievement? And I want to acknowledge that achievement is but one thing that we worry about in schools. I can't imagine what schools would look like if we didn't have achievement. But I also want to acknowledge my colleagues here in Germany that I've worked with, and they have worked themselves at looking at what I've done to achievement. They've looked at self-concept, motivation, and other attributes. And so building up the story about the use of evidence, I put it to you, those of you who are in schools, 20 years ago, most principals probably wouldn't have listened or read the research on a particular topic. That is just not true anymore. Principals, school leaders, teachers are very good critics of the research to add to the story. So let me add my critique to this notion. What I've been doing is trying to collect as much evidence as I can. And this graph never ceases to amaze me. This is around 300 million students across 450 different influences, from the home, the school, the family, the student, the curricula, the teachers, the technology, the out-of-school influences. If it's out there, I'd like to think I've got it. And when you do a synthesis of lots of meta-analyses and therefore lots of studies, I love starting with this graph because I did not expect it. I expected this graph to be around the 0 point. You know the story. Everything that's a problem in Germany, schools caused it. Everything that's a problem in Germany, teachers need to fix it. And if we're not sure, we'll pass another piece of legislating asking schools to do more. And the critics of our business are everywhere. So I expected a lot more negative influences, and as you can see, there's hardly any. And that 5% down there, most of it makes perfect sense. Effect size of bullying, minus 0.3. Effect size of anxiety, minus 0.5. Yeah, there's a couple down there that we have responsibility over, holding a child back a year. Retention, minus 0.3. Labelling, minus 0.6. There are problems, but 95% of things we do to kids enhances their achievement. And what my interest is what's the common story in the blue zone compared to the story in the yellow zone? And what I want to reference here is that 0.4, which is the average. Yeah, the numbers are important, but I'm not going to go into details of those this evening. I just want you to remember the point 4. Above that, and look, there's many, many schools here in Germany, many teachers, many students in that blue zone. And the visible learning story is this simple. Do you have the courage to reliably identify those schools, those teachers, those classrooms that are in the blue zone, form a coalition of success around them, and then invite those in the yellow zone to join? It's that simple. The biggest problem in education is the lack of courage. It is so much easier. It is so much easier to tweak the curriculum, fiddle with the assessments, have new structures of schools, worry about the parents, worry about all those things. Not because they're unimportant. They make a positive effect. But compared to stuff in the blue zone, of which there is plenty, and I would estimate here in Germany, that graph should tell you, 50 to 60% of schools are already there. In my political job in Australia, I had to meet in the 9 years various members of parliament, Minister of Education, Director Generals. I had 66 of them in 9 years. My gosh, we go over them a lot. And I said to every one of them, it should be a badge of courage that you don't go to Finland, Shanghai and Singapore. We have excellence right here. We have excellence right here in Germany. And so this is the benchmark that I want to set for my talk this evening. So the question then arises, where does individualization fit? Where does personalization fit into this continuum? Ouch. Individualization, yeah, 0.26, it's positive. But it's, my view, it's not the problem I want to fix. It's too small. And you've got to ask, why is personalisation twice the amount? And as I want to show you, it actually isn't. Let me go there. Let me go there. And just for the good news, I don't like individualisation or personalisation. I've got another alternative I want to offer you. Individualisation. We tailor what's happening to the student's level of ability, their pace or readiness. It's got that one-on-one which every parent wants for their child. And every teacher wants for the child they don't want in the class, provided that one-on-one's with someone else. We get the student to follow a personal sequence. Great idea. Compelling argument. But 0.26, not that successful. Personalised learning. We're tailoring it more to the interests, the preferences and the needs of the students. Trying to get the student to have a voice in the goals, in the content and the pace. And it's framed around this notion of my learning, my way. We published a paper very recently on preferences and personalised learning. And the whole notion was around learning styles. 0.40. Wow! This sounds pretty good. What's wrong with personalised learning if it's going to take into account the personal preferences of the student? There's a problem. What we did is we looked at the studies that matched how the students claim their preferences and their learning styles with the teaching aligned with those particular learning styles, whether it be visual, kinesthetic, you name it. We also then looked at the studies and said, which one of them just correlate different learning strategies, different learning notions with learning. Now, you would expect, if you ask a student, do you like to solve problems verbally, that high verbal students would say yes, and low verbal students would say no. The correlate studies, no surprise. And when you divide them up, you get a totally different story. Matching to students' personalised learning has an effect size close to 0. The correlates. In many ways, I think they are I'm trying to find the right word. Cheating's too strong. Masquerading, misguiding studies that look at learning styles and look at correlates increases the correlations because it's got nothing to do with how we align the teaching with the students' preferences. So I put personalised learning overall effect close to 0. So at this stage, we aren't looking very healthy. Individualised is low, personalised is low. We talk about student voice. There's a right time for student voice, and there's a wrong time for student voice. And the words are wrong. It should be student voice about learning. Like I call my work visible learning, not because learning's visible, it's not. You can't see it. It's here. I want to make that learning visible. It's really interesting when you ask students to talk aloud about how you've solved the problem. It's even more fascinating to ask teachers, educators. We as educators struggle with the language of how we learn. Now, I know Ingrid here is a good friend and she's very, very smart. And when I asked her, how did you solve the problem? She says, oh, it's easy, John. I did this and then I went there and then I went there. But I've done brain surgery. And Ingrid has a grasshopper in here. And what she does is I ask a question, she hops over here, realises it's wrong, goes over here, and iterates to find the right answer. And she does it in a millisecond. And then what she tells me is how she went from there to there. My point being is, if we as educators struggle to have a voice about learning, what chance students? And when I analyse, we have 20,000 hours of classroom instruction that we've taped and videoed. And when I go through that and say how many times in 20,000 hours, which is about 3 years of a student in a classroom, how many times does a teacher think aloud or a teacher ask a student to think aloud? 0. Learning is the greatest mystery in our classrooms. That's why I want student voice about learning. I want to teach the students how they can articulate what they're doing, how they can listen to each other. Because every student is sitting in that class and they're saying, Ingrid, how did you do it? And what do we say as teachers? You do this, 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 and this. I wish learning was that smooth. For those of you in the room who, like me, were music teachers, you know it's a staccato, up and down. It's not straightforward. And so I want that to come through. What chance is that going to happen with one-on-one instruction and personalised learning? Why is it, for example, that when we put students in front of any kind of technology, when they work in pairs, it doubles the effect size than when they work alone or when they work with 3 or more? It's a chance to hear how others are thinking. I want to introduce the notion of customised learning because I want to get away from the notion that it's one-on-one. I want to get to the notion that our job is to teach students to work alone and work in groups. And there's a lot of skill in working with groups that need to be taught. I want to talk about structured tailoring because I want to make the argument there's a right time for student voice, there's a wrong time. There's a right time for certain teaching methods, there's a wrong time. There's a right time for certain learning strategies and a wrong time, and our job is to teach that. The other beauty of the notion of customised learning, it can be about a group of students, not just an individual. Students learn dramatically from each other, for good or bad. And our job is to teach them to learn from others in a good way. So I have this notion of customised learning that's context-based, that's based on progressions, on curriculum, that's based on teacher-driven adaptation and teacher-driven gradual release of responsibility to teach the students how to become their own teachers. And that includes customised learning aspects when it's personalised and individualised and in the group setting. There are problems with the personalised, individualised, and that it so often becomes a slogan. It overlaps with other phrases. And I'm going to talk about differentiation, for example. It's probably one of the most misunderstood notions in the business. And let me say right here and now, differentiation has got nothing to do with putting kids in groups. I'll come back to that. It sounds good. It's hype. And you can see there's little robust research showing large-scale gains and a lot of research showing very, very small gains. And it does emphasise learning preferences, which is probably the most dismissed notion in our business. One of the issues comes back to our expectations. And the argument that I want to put to you is it's less what teachers do that matters and more how teachers think about what they do. And one of the strongest thinking aspects is expectations. And you can see that teachers who have high expectations, and they tend to have it for all the students, the effect size is huge, doubles the rate of learning. And teachers with low expectations, and sadly they tend to have it for all the students, 0.03. You can see the effect size of parents, almost as large as the socioeconomic background of the parents. Huge effect. And obviously, students. Now the students one is good and bad. If the student thinks, I'm a C student, and I'm happy when I get a C, your job is to mess that up. The expectation is lowering them. And one of the things we find time and time again when students are put into groups, particularly with labels, elephants or butterflies or whatever, they know why they're there. They know they're getting lesser work. They know that the teacher is trying to make them a learner by giving them tasks they could already do. And they miss out on the rich depth that the other students get. And you can see why grouping is not my favourite activity. But let me be clear. The effect size of within-class grouping is 0.5. Grouping that's in any way labelled or quasi-permanent has a 0 to negative effect. There is nothing wrong with grouping. We can maximise the variability in a classroom to our benefit. But these expectations are powerful. And I want to show you the work my colleague Christine Rubies-Davies is doing, where she goes into schools and she identifies those teachers with high expectations and those with low expectations. And I'm going to put up half a dozen different attributes. We published an article last year that's free on the web with 40 different attributes. And my point is the classrooms are dramatically different as a function of how the teacher thinks, their expectations. And the one that surprised me and Christy was differentiation. But I'm sure you know why. The low expectation teacher said, oh yes, we differentiate. We put kids in groups and give them work that they can do. The high expectation teacher said, no, we don't do that kind of nonsense at all. I expect all the students to reach the success criteria, but I allow different ways and different times to get there, which is what all the gurus of differentiation have been saying for the last 50 years. It's about different ways and different times, not grouping. And so you can kind of hint where kids who are personalised or individualised, what kind of treatment they get, and no wonder the effect sizes are quite small. This graph hit me a few years ago, and yes, it's based in the United States, and no, I'm sorry, I don't have a German equivalent, but what this person looked at was the employment rate from 1980s to about 2012. And I'm using math, but you could substitute it for any subject. Students who are high in the content and high in social skills, their employment's gone up. No surprise. Students who are low in the content and low in the social skills, their employment rate's gone down. But look in the middle. Employers are saying, if you don't have sufficient knowledge, we can teach that. And in our incredibly specialised world that we're working in now, we're welcome to teach that. But high social skills. We want employers who can translate, who can communicate, who can work in groups. And if you don't give us those, they're no use to us. We can't teach that, it's too late. And so if I came through your German high school system, particularly around high stakes examination stage times, if I don't see some occasions when students are doing high stakes examinations in groups and there's a score for the group and there's a score for the individual's contribution to the group, you're not making your students employable. And this is why I talk about the notion of teaching students to work in groups. We've done a lot of work over the years looking at this. We've even got a fancy name for it, teacher collective efficacy. Teachers collectively working together to heighten their expectations. And it's hard work. Oh my goodness. So many teachers want to go back to their room, pull up their moat, and indulge in their passion alone. The effect size of teacher collective efficacy about impact, 1.32, quadruples the rate of learning. And here's the fascination. The students are not even in the room. When teachers get together and critique each other, help each other see their impact on their students, they get that kind of effect. And we worked with many schools, and I have to say we struggled. So we invented a new concept, student collective efficacy, because it was easier to work with students than it is to work with teachers. And we asked, what are the skills we need to make this happen? And you can see the first three there, and I'm going to come back to it. There are specific skills, but there's also the confidence that you can contribute to the group. And some teachers in some staff rooms, not my job, I'm just going to sit back and watch. My job's in the classroom. This is where leadership is so powerful. And the third one, and I have to confess, having been a Dean of Education in 3 different universities for 20 years, I'm not very good at this. You have to have the confidence that the group will come up with a better answer than you. What I do, I sit there and think, oh my gosh, this is going on and on and on. I can do it myself. They know, they let me, and I don't get collective efficacy. I don't get the impact. Let me go back to the skills. There's I skills, individual skills. There's we skills. The most critical one is, can the student, can the teacher stand in the shoes of another person and see their world? That's what your kids want. They want you to understand how they're thinking, how they're feeling, what's going on. You don't have to agree with it, but that's the starting premise. Empathy, social sensitivity. It's the same in the staff room. And then the task has to be appropriately challenging and open-ended. There's no point in having a closed question when you get a group of teachers together, right or wrong. That's okay, but get on with it. But an open question, and there has to be a success criteria for each individual, their contribution, and for the group. It's not easy, but if you want to quadruple the rate of learning, customising your learning so you maximise collective efficacy is incredibly powerful. Let me go to some pedagogical problems with personalised, individualised learning. I don't know about Germany. My kids were brought up in the United States. In the state that they were, North Carolina, it's compulsory that if a school prescribes a textbook, every student must have one. Therefore, no students have one. Every single lesson, bar none, is a worksheet. I hate them. Boring. Completion of work. Doing. Or now, we've got adaptive software, choosing the next item. We're writing a book at the moment in special education, and it's really interesting. In special education students, for many of them, the most critical thing to teach them from age 3 onwards is the ability to transfer what they learn here to what they learn there. And our argument in the book is that's what we should be teaching every student. We don't teach transfer. Surely that is one of the major aims of education systems, that students learn here so they can transfer. And this is where individualization, personalization misses. We know learning thrives on challenge. And if you don't believe me, watch the students play their computer games. They wouldn't play them if they weren't challenging. And they know how to hit that right sweet spot. Not too hard, not too easy, and not too boring. When Graham Nuttall analysed classrooms for many, many, many years, he found that 40 to 50% of everything taught in every class the students know already. The problem of a lot of schoolwork is it's too easy. All you have to do is do it. You, I, all students thrive on that sense of challenge. But in computer games, it's not just challenge, there are multiple opportunities to learn. Like we know that every one of us, regardless of our prior ability, needs 5 to 7 opportunities to learn something before we learn it. Not one. And we know that we need feedback in that cycle. And I want to talk about the equity problem. My frustration is equity, again, is often defined as groups of students. I know in my Australian context, the Productivity Commission showed that 74% of students in schools who are not making adequate progress are not in any equity group. And a lot of students in the so-called equity groups were making great progress. But when we talked about their underachievement, we were depriving educators of their sense of excellence, and we were demeaning the students who were making that kind of progress. I have a much simpler way of looking at equity, and that is every student who doesn't make at least a year's growth for a year's input is not getting a fair deal. And I don't think it's difficult to work out a year's growth for a year's input. We have a curriculum, we have testing, we have teacher judgment, we have people who are absolutely passionate about their subject. We ask teachers to bring along 2 pieces of work a year apart and have a discussion of whether it's a year's growth. And I have to confess, having sat in some of those groups, sometimes the work a year later is not as good as the work as the year before. It has to be called. Equity is about not making that year's progress. Choice is not my favourite topic. We know that when teachers, principals choose professional learning, they typically choose that which they're pretty good at. We know that when students have choice, they choose what they're good at. Novices don't know what novices don't know. That's why we have teachers, to teach kids that which they didn't know. I worry about the over-individualised learner, for reasons that should be obvious now, particularly what our employers have been asking for the last 30 or 40 years. And I also know that not all learners have high autonomy. It's a taught skill. I know I need, quite often, structure, guidance and shared purpose. So customised learning. My argument is that it works if it helps asking these 3 core questions. Where am I going? How am I going? And where do I go next? And as I talk about the attributes of the student, I also want to note that these are the attributes I want the teachers to teach. The highest form of learning is the notion of when students can drive their own learning. And if you want to see it in action, go into a class of 4-year-olds. You hardly ever see it in a class of 8-year-olds. I'm particularly wedded to that at the moment because the luxury of my life is I'm a granddad. And I've got 7 little grandkids who are going through school, and I watch them. 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. And the 8 and 9-year-old learned very, very quickly that their job was to come to school, looked like they were paying attention and watched the teacher work. No compliance. We know why we do it. But it's a killer. It's a killer. If 4-year-olds can drive their learning, so can 8-year-olds, so can 10-year-olds, and so can 15-year-olds. I want this notion that our job is not high achievement. Not every student is going to be Einstein or Madame Curie. But every student can make progress. Every student can make that at least a year's growth. And I put the emphasis on the word at least, because some kids have to make 2 or 3 years progress. And when you put that as your goal, we can do it. We have one school we've been working with for the past 3 or 4 years. Their students are making 4 years growth for every year of input. They started from a very low base, but they're getting there because their mission is not high achievement. They failed because they started way down there. But they're incredibly successful because they're moving in the right direction. And I want to put to you also that notion that customised learning is based on this notion of equity. It's based on this notion of teacher clarity. Doubles the rate of learning. Teacher clarity is when teachers are clear about what success looks like. They tell the students. They show them worked examples of success. They show a C student what a B piece of work looks like. The student shouldn't have to guess what good means and when's good enough. And there are lots of ways that we can look at that teacher clarity to double that rate of learning. For example, what am I learning today? And we have a lot of work from our recent book, you can see there, about how we try and get teachers to tell the students about the standards of the work, about the skills they need to successfully do it and teach them. To sequence the skills in a way that follows the student's journey and how they progress. We know also about why am I learning this? Let me tell you, the answer is not so that you can use it in your adult life. The answer is that if you do this, then you'll be more ready to do this next phase. And giving them a sense of purpose. Why is it you're going to learn all these facts? Because then we're going to go and look at some problem solving using these facts. What do most students think? We're going to learn these facts so we can repeat it back in a test. Some kids like that. Some kids, it's just not what they want to do. We do surface learning so that we can do problem solving. And I have no time for that debate that so often happens, that we have to have more precious knowledge in our curricula, or we must have more problem solving in our curricula. I'm greedy. I want both. I like the Singapore motion for math, for every subject, maths, reading, science, from age 3 onwards. Maths is problem solving for which you need skills. No wonder they're number 1 in the world. They don't get into these crazy debates of one or the other. And the last part of clarity is, how will I know I've learnt it? Surely the best exit ticket is a student can teach another student. Now, I'm not talking about a bright student teaching a struggling student or an 8-year-old teaching a 4-year-old. Yes, that works, particularly for the student doing the teaching. But a lot of parents get a little upset that I didn't send my student to school to teach other kids. I'm talking about in a regular classroom. We do a lot of work with students creating lesson plans. Like, think about it. Who's in charge of quality in the school? Who chooses what the lesson is about, what the lesson planning is, what the opening of the sentence is, what the teaching methods are, what the skills are going to be taught, what the assessment is, what the assignment is, what the... Poor old translators can't keep up. Sorry about that. My point is, it's the teacher. No, we can involve the students in those phases as well, so they understand the relevance and how they'll know they learnt it. And so the whole notion of clarity is really critical. Oops, I pressed the wrong button. What have I done, guys? Can you move it on to the next one, please? Oops, too far. Go back one. Go back. There, thank you. So what I want to end on here is this notion of what it is that I want. Like, I'm not a great fan of, as you've heard, of personalised, individualised. I like the notion of customised, because it's customised to the individual and the group. I particularly like the notion of that our job is to teach students to drive their own learning, so that they know their current level of understanding. They know where they're going, and they're confident to take on this challenge. And that's a really big one. Like, take gifted students. The majority of gifted students do not become gifted adults. Less than 2% of child prodigies go on to be gifted adults. Why? Because in their teenage years, when they're asked to do something outside their area of giftedness, they have no confidence to fail. They have no confidence to take on challenge. And they fall over. And there are many, many students who are a little terrified of being wrong. No one enters a class in Germany to learn that which they already know. It's what they don't know. So it does require courage. And one of the things we look for continually as we do our walkthroughs in schools, what happens when a student makes an error? Is it an opportunity to learn, or is it an embarrassment? It's got to be an opportunity. They know how to choose their tools to guide their learning. They seek feedback. Like, we know teachers give an incredible amount of feedback. You do. But on average, kids receive about 8 to 10 seconds a day. If you don't believe me, Janet and I had our 40th wedding anniversary this year. What's the secret? Easy. I am the world's best selective listener. I know when she tells me I've made a mistake, I have to do it again. I don't have to worry about it. It's so much easier not to hear. And that's what your kids do. They hear the feedback, but it's not about them. And many of them, the feedback comes in and they know there's no opportunity to redo the work, so why hear it? We have to change that. Effective feedback is that which is heard, understood, and actionable from the student point of view. And I think it's going to be very exciting as we get into the world of AI, how students are going to get a lot more where they can hear, understand, and action, and have many opportunities to interrogate and ask the machine, how did you do it? Because they're not going to hear it in the classroom. They're going to have many opportunities to have 5, 10, 15, 20 chances of doing it again and again and again. And I want them, and they have to be taught this, and particularly in AI, that they can evaluate their progress. Remember what I said a few moments ago? Who's in charge of quality? Oh my goodness, folks. As students learn AI, we have to teach them to judge the quality. Is it right or wrong? Is it good enough? Do they need to seek more information? Was the question they asked appropriate? These are necessary skills to learn to successfully use what I would argue is the biggest change in my life coming, for good and bad. And they can recognise their learning. They know when they're successful. And as you can see, they can work and teach others. So my message this evening is that I do think in this business, the narrative we use is critical. I'm not a fan of personalised. I'm not a fan of individualised. I like customised, but more, I like this notion that students drive their own learning. I like the notion that teachers are responsible for teaching students to drive their own learning. I want teachers to gradually, sometimes better than gradually, release responsibility to teach the students so that they all make at least a year's growth for a year's input. Thank you.
Thanks a lot for your talk. I'm wondering, do you need a translation for the panel that's following right now?
Are you going to speak in Hebrew?
No,
German,
we would like to try in German.
I will need a translation.
Okay.
There's a magic box.
So I guess there's somebody who's bringing it out to you.
These people I've been with most of the week. They're the hardest working people in the room, the translators.
Okay,
please thank them.
Extra applause. Before we start the panel, I would like to ask you two personal questions. Before you got to be a professor, you were a student. Did you ever meet a teacher who achieved all of this, what you've discussed? So in the blue zone on the graph at the beginning, would you say there's Miss or Mrs. or Mr. who had the full points?
I actually did part of my apprenticeship as a painter and paper hanger, and that was part of my going through school as well. And yes, Mr. Tomlinson was my final year maths teacher. He was very rigid.
Rigid?
Rigid as anything, strict as anything. But he had this passion that he was going to get every one of us through the year. He never gave up on a single one of us. He went on, and he was in your face for every one of us, and we saw that. And I still keep in contact with him. I'm still very grateful. I have statistics in my PhD thanks to Mr. Tomlinson.
Okay.
And he did two things. He cared that we cared about his passion for math, and he saw something in us that we did not see in ourselves.
And it wasn't only you and Mr. Tomlinson, but all the other pupils as well.
Yeah.
Okay, ich habe gefragt, gab es denn einen Lehrer, der sozusagen volle Punktzahl bekommen würde von John Hattie? Und er sagt, Grüße gehen raus zu Mr. Tomlinson, der sehr streng war, sehr rigide, also offenbar nicht so der Buddy-Teacher, aber eben einer, dessen persönliches Ziel oder Motivation es war, allen Schülern Mathe beizubringen. Und er sagt, das war in seinem späteren Lebenslauf, das können Sie sich jetzt lebhaft vorstellen, auch noch wichtig. And I know that your son is a teacher as well.
Three kids.
But are they all teachers? All teachers?
2 wives and a son.
Okay, so, and do you have to argue with them about your research, or do they do as Daddy said?
Well, one of my sons said to me once, I agree with everything you say except class size.
Okay.
And the irony is, he's never had a class less than 90. 95-year-olds, 90 whatever. 3 teachers. Best form of teaching I've ever seen. But yeah, like all sons, they're very critical.
Okay.
We love them.
It might be vivid discussions you've had with your family.
Our family discussions are very interesting. My wife is also an educator. We all have the answer and we all disagree, and it's real fun.
Okay, ich vermute,
Welcome to the barbecue one night.
Einige von Ihnen leben in Lehrerfamilien und können das dann vielleicht nachvollziehen.